Well, the federal election might be 7 weeks gone, but one result in a New South Wales South Coast seat has prompted a former MP to ask some serious questions about how we count our votes. In the seat of Gilmore, former New South Wales Treasurer Andrew Constance lost by less than 0.4% of the vote. Now, close elections are part and parcel of our system, but declining primary votes mean that candidates are scraping through purely on preferences. And as a result, we end up with local members who don't command broad support in the community. For instance, Andrew Constance received a total of 46,941 first preference votes, while Labor candidate and victor Fiona Phillips only received 40,175 votes, a difference of almost 7,000 votes, and yet Fiona Phillips still won. Joining me now to discuss the need for electoral reform is Andrew Constance. Good to see you again, Andrew.
Hey, Chris, how you going?
Doing very well. Your competitor, Fiona Phillips, only managed to secure in percentage terms 36% of the primary vote and yet walked away as the victor. Our optional preferential voting system in federal elections, it produces some doozies at times, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's crazy to think that we have optional preferential voting at state level and then compulsory preferential voting at a national level. I think there does need to be consistency. I think it's worthy of investigation by the Parliament and any appropriate committees that do look at the Electoral Commission. I think, ultimately, for me, I was very pleased with the outcome in terms of obviously being so far in front on primaries. But ultimately, I think the community, and I had a lot of people say to me afterwards, well, the preferences don't necessarily reflect, and the preference flow process doesn't necessarily reflect viewpoints of the majority of people when they go to cast a vote. And that's why, having lived under the optional preferential voting system at a state level for the 5 elections that I ran in, to see this type of experience, I just think it's worthy of consideration of public debate beyond just letting it go and not having the discussion.
And we're supposed to be a federation, Andrew. Consistency is really important if you're wanting the public, the elector, the voter, to understand how the system works. If we had the same kind of system at state, all territory, all federal levels, of course we've got the problem with no upper houses in some areas, but if you had it as consistently as we can, people would understand it a lot more.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately, we've got a Labor MP here in Gilmore whose election is solely on the basis of the Greens. And, they need to be held to account for that. We've seen a national government elected with a 32% primary. We've got to look at our electoral system. We've got to look at, ultimately, reform of it. I saw instances, and it's only until you get a close result that you actually really thoroughly study and examine what goes on. I think the Electoral Commission does have some answers in terms of the conduct of the recent election, particularly when it comes to the decision not to have mobile pre-polls in aged care residents. That's one issue. In the case of Gilmore, they shifted the vote count out of Gilmore up to Wollongong at Port Kembla. And, that did make it difficult for me to obviously arrange scrutineers from Batemans Bay to travel all that way every day for, what turned out to be 3 weeks. So I just think, we've got to make sure that with the electoral system that it is robust, it reflects the viewpoints of the majority of Australians, and we make sure that we have consistency, you've just indicated, between state and federal levels.
So what has your research revealed in terms of anomalies with ballot papers?
Well, look, we saw around 5,100, I think, odd informal votes. We asked for a recount of those votes. We were denied. I still question, I can't understand why the Electoral Commission did that. It's their decision. But ultimately, you cannot have a situation where the trigger point for an automatic recount is 100 votes out of potentially 127,000 electors.
Yeah.
That has been the trigger point for many, many decades. I think it needs to be higher because ultimately it is a clumsy process that we work through in Australia in terms of our voting. We should be moving to an online system. We
yes.
have banking, and that removes any doubt whatsoever in terms of some of the practices. We saw, for instance, the Nurses Union handing out a how to vote card, which I understand isn't registered. Now, that wasn't registered at the time. You know, they're the types of things that go on in close elections. And, you know, this is not something that just necessarily benefits the Liberal Party. I think this is something which, you know, ultimately benefits our community. And that's why, you know, I have taken this decision to speak up and ask for, you know, our community, our parliaments to actually have a close look at this, because I think it's worthy of consideration.
Just quickly, there seems to be a cavalcade of displaced Liberals who are keen to get a seat in the Senate. Are you in that cavalcade?
No, I'm just in the cavalcade, which is going to win Gilmore in 2024, 25, whenever the next election is. So, you know, I've made clear that to my local branch members, you know, I do want to have another crack. And, you know, in the meantime, you know, get a bit of a break after 20 years of state politics.